On the morning of Monday, June 19, 1865, Union Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, to take command of 2,000 federal troops who had recently landed in this city, the remotest part of the Confederacy. On that muggy summer morning, Granger's men marched through Galveston, reading General Order Number 3, first at Union Army Headquarters, then at the Customs House, and finally at the Negro Church on Broadway. This is the text of that order. The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness, either there or elsewhere. Finally, the end of slavery. Or was it? Lincoln, the executive referenced in the order, was dead. On plantations and farms, masters decided how and when to announce the news, and many waited until after harvest or for a government agent to arrive. Even in Galveston, the ex-Confederate mayor forced freed people back to work, and formerly enslaved people who acted on the news were frequently shot or worse. One eyewitness reported that the trees along the river were hanging with black people who had tried to leave their plantations. All of this makes the celebration and survival of Juneteenth truly remarkable.
At first, celebrations of Juneteenth involved church or community gatherings in Texas. It gradually spread across the country as blacks migrated from Texas and told others about Juneteenth. Yet it faced many obstacles. Jim Crow laws prohibited people from using public properties. Landowners and white supremacists would not necessarily allow their employees to take the day off. During the Depression, very few people could afford to take the day off. Juneteenth seemed to be fading until the civil rights movement resuscitated it. An important moment was when Texas made it a state holiday. Now, Colorado and 46 other states have it as a state holiday. There is currently a movement to make it a national holiday. Indeed, as a celebration of freedom, it is of equal importance to July 4th. Today, celebrations of Juneteenth include public readings of the Emancipation Proclamation, singing spirituals and gospel songs, and prayers. Festivities may include rodeos, street fairs, family reunions, and Miss Juneteenth contest. Barbecues and red strawberry soda are particularly common. In Denver, Juneteenth will be celebrated by a music festival this coming weekend. You can find details about this festival on the web. If I may quote from Juneteenth.com, it really is more than just a celebration. Juneteenth commemorates freedom. It is a time for assessment, self-improvement, and for planning the future. Its growing popularity signifies a level of maturity and dignity in America long overdue. In cities across the country, people of all races, nationalities, and religions are joining hands to truthfully acknowledge a period in our history that shaped and continues to influence our society today. Sensitized to the conditions and experience of others, only then can we make significant and lasting improvements in our society.
When I was 18, I wrote a school newspaper article extolling the virtues of merit. It was all about how working hard helps us advance, and completely bought into the American dream that we can pull ourselves out of nothing if we just work hard enough. To be honest, the fact that I bought into this at all, let alone wrote an article for all to see, is one of the more embarrassing things I can think of doing in my life, because I see clearly now that I got all of it wrong. And I know why. I bought into it because I wanted it to be true. I was about to head to college and was seeing doors opened for me. If I admitted that hard work wouldn't always advance a person and that something else was influencing my own advancement, it would tarnish my own sense of pride and accomplishment in what I had done. I really, really wanted it to be true that I'd earned everything for myself.
But, as Reverend Tracy Blackman says in White Privilege, Let's Talk, a resource for transformational dialogue, it is the not seeing things through the lens of race that makes privilege invisible to whites.
Buying into this myth meant that I had to come up with excuses, like why were my advanced placement classes primarily white while my school was not? Why were all of our administrators and most of our teachers white? Was it a coincidence that all the white students were in the college prep classes and could afford the textbooks and computers and exams, or that the white students could gather in the local park, but groups of black students would be broken up? Was it really the few miles of distance that made people tell me that the mostly white school nearby was better and safer than mine? I didn't want to see the disadvantages other students experienced because I didn't want to admit that I had been on the receiving end of privilege. When I finally admitted that fact, it began the journey I am still on to educate myself and figure out what my responsibilities are.
Because, as Reverend John Dorhauer says, if you are white, you are a beneficiary of privileges you no longer have the right to ignore.
So when I came across this scripture in Jeremiah, it was shocking to me how similar the story feels to the story of Juneteenth. I confess, though, I was a little jealous. In Jeremiah, when the people disobey God and keep slaves that should have been freed, God promises to punish them for disobeying their covenant. It feels so immediate, and I can't help but wonder what would have happened if we'd had immediate responses to help repair the harm done, like reparations, at the time of abolishing slavery, and how much that would have changed to and where we are today. For white people in the United States, though, whether our ancestors enslaved people or not, whether we consider ourselves racist or not, whether we acknowledge it or not, our families and corporations and country all benefited from slavery rather than suffering the repercussions of it. Not only did systems continue to perpetuate slavery and disenfranchisement under other names, white folks also benefited by time. Time to build and accumulate wealth because others couldn't. Time to build homes and the ability to live in good neighborhoods because others couldn't. Time to build families and heritage and connections because others couldn't.
As Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. said, it is a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he should lift himself by his own bootstraps. It is even worse to tell a man to lift himself by his own bootstraps when someone is standing on the boot.
What has come of this history of inequality is that we're still unequal, but white folks don't have to acknowledge it because that inequality is buried in everything that we do. And as the people benefiting from that inequality, it is so much easier to credit merit and keep burying the signs of inequality that are all around us.
Melinda Gates sums up this idea in her book, The Moment of Lift. Success and failure aren't entirely fair. It hurts to give up your sense of superiority and say, I'm no better than others. So instead, we invent excuses for our need to exclude. We say it's about merit or tradition when it's really just protecting our privilege and our pride.
Our Kirk social justice team was formed a year ago with the call to address racism. At our first meeting, we sat down to brainstorm places where we see racism, and we found it. In everything. In our schools, in politics, voting, healthcare, representation, and housing, in our prisons, law enforcement, environment and economy, in our art, music, relationships, and churches. And what we realized is that we could look at every single social justice issue through the lens of race, because racism is so embedded into our lives that it impacts every other issue. We also recognize that it is part of our covenant as people of faith to commit to this journey, and that for those of us who are white, part of committing to this journey means listening to people of color but not asking them to do the work for us. With that knowledge, our social justice team has been presenting events to the congregation once every month or two, looking at different justice issues through the lens of race. So on that note, we wanted to end today with the call to action and the invitation to proceed on this journey together.